Good morning and Happy New Year to you all. Now don't worry, we haven't forgotten to have our Bible reading this morning. We'll have it in a moment, because today we're introducing the Bible verse we will use as a church for the coming year. A verse that will direct our prayer and our plans and encourage us to grow and mature as disciples of Jesus. Our verse is probably quite familiar to you. It's Micah 6 verse 8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. It's a clear message. In fact, it's a clear instruction and a requirement for God of how we should be. But before we dig a little deeper into what it will mean for us today, perhaps we should find a little more about Micah and the context that he was writing in, as the book of Micah may be unfamiliar to us. The prophet Micah lived in the 8th century BC and came from a town in Judah. He prophesied at a similar time to the prophets Isaiah and Amos. And like the others, Micah condemned the spiritual emptiness of the people and focused particularly on the attitudes of the wealthy and powerful and the way in which they oppress the poor with their actions. In fact, Micah is often referred to as the prophet of the poor. But Micah was not just speaking on their behalf, he was speaking from experience. He came from a completely different social situation than Isaiah. Isaiah belonged to a more elite social class and would have enjoyed the benefits this brought. But Micah lived in a rural community and so had first-hand experience of what life was like for those who lived in poverty. It was a life that for many had become very difficult over time. The life of the people of Judah had changed. It had not always been as it was in Micah's day. There had been times of great peace and prosperity, but all had begun to slip away. And as can often happen when people who have had wealth and power risk losing it, they hold on more tightly to it at the expense of others less fortunate. The book of Micah suggests that this was the situation. The rich were feeling complacent about their situation, and the poor desperate. But it was not just money that was causing problems. The contrast between extreme wealth and poverty was exasperated by injustices on the part of the elite rich and the ruling class, particularly against those who worked the land. They were driven off their properties by those in power and often left to find a living elsewhere. It appeared that dishonest practices prevailed everywhere. The judges were corrupt and the poor had no redress, nowhere to go to find justice. Prophets and priests were in the pockets of the rich and turned a blind eye to the struggles of those around them, covering up their actions by outwardly offering lavish gifts at the temple. These were empty actions that did not reflect the moral and spiritual vacuum that existed. Their role of leading the people in the way of the law was now pushed to one side. They were all in a sorry state indeed. The Israelites had drifted far from God. In the past, their faithfulness to God and the following of moral law underpinned society. They were encouraged to care for the stranger, the foreigner, those in need. And even though it was still part of their practice to daily recite the prayer known as the Shema, reminding them of the importance of God in their lives and that He was their one and only God, still they had turned away. It's no wonder that Micah was called to speak into the life of the people. The times he lived in were hard. But as I read about the background of Micah, it struck me that we could be describing the world today. In fact, I read a section of a book I was looking at to my daughter without telling her what it was, and she readily accepted that I was reading her something from a current article. It's sad to think that humanity does not learn. We can still see today the same behaviour in the world that Micah witnessed 700 years before the birth of Jesus. But Micah is called by God to turn things around. His is a short but powerful message a prophecy that swings from constant warnings of doom to the promise of deliverance. But it's in the final chapter where Micha offers to the people hope in the darkness, and it is here that we find our verse for the year and our reading today. Micha has pointed out the wrongs of the people, told them that God offers them a new way to live. He doesn't want empty religious practices, offerings and sacrifices. He wants a change of heart, a return to the ways of God. They can no longer think that they can buy God off with the minimum amount of effort, because it's time to start afresh. It's time to begin once again to live lives that reflect the character of God into the world. It is time for something new. Micha calls the people to reflect on where they are, to look back and recall the covenant made with Moses, to once again make the laws that help build society key in their lives. He calls them to come before God with open hearts and minds, seeking answers from God on the way forward. It's a straightforward answer, says Micha to the people of Israel. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Micha's challenge to the people of Judah is a challenge to us too. As we begin a new year, we have the opportunity for reflection, a time to look at our lives, consider where things need to change. But instead of focusing on our physical and financial health, as often happens, it may be an ideal opportunity to think about our spiritual health. Just as the people of Micha's day did, we also must consider what our relationship with God is like. Can we sometimes be guilty of complacency in our relationship with Him? Perhaps not always putting in the effort that we should. Is it time for something new for us too? What does God require of the people of All Saints in 2021? That is our question today. And as we emerge out of the struggles of COVID into a world that will undoubtedly be changed, we must ask, what does He require of us? As we serve our community, what does He require of us? As we seek to grow in holiness, what does the Lord require? We may be living nearly 3,000 years later than Micha, but his words are the same to us today. It's simple, says Micha. He has shown us. We do not need to think it's a mystery. It's no mystery at all. What God requires is what He has always required. God says, I have shown you, and begin with these three things. First, we are asked to do justly. Act in a just, fair way towards others. Treat them as you would want to be treated. To the people of Judah, this would have been understood as living with a clear sense of right and wrong. In particular, to provide for and protect the innocent from injustice. But I think it's much more than that. Like us, Micha saw the inequalities in society, the oppression and injustice shown to many who do not have a voice. We, like Micha, live within a community where inequality is evident every day. As Christians, we are called to be a voice for others. We are called to highlight how important it is for everyone in society that it seeks to be just. It's not always easy to find our voice, but we must speak out when we see injustice. Injustice in the world, in the plight of refugees, poverty and so much more. And injustice closer to home, in our benefit system, in our asylum processes, in housing, mental health, in our schools, our relationships, even in our churches. During the last few months, we have seen many people who have struggled because they have not been able to access the support they need because of COVID. They have suffered further misery and injustice because of this. Many have now been pushed even further to the fringes of society than they were before. This will need to be addressed by those in government, by those who hold the purse strings. But we too can act. we can act by speaking out and by praying faithfully for a fairer society. But justice and fairness are not only the responsibility of those in power. Treating people with fairness begins with us. The German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, "We must learn to regard people less in the light of what they do or omit to do, and more in the light of what they suffer." We must have open hearts and minds, and be willing to listen to each other's stories without judgment, trying to resist the temptation to pigeonhole people into a particular group or circumstance, but instead to see each other as individuals, as children of God, just as God sees us. So let's now consider love mercy. Love mercy contains the Hebrew word hesed, which means loyal love or loving kindness. Along with justice, there must also be mercy. Both justice and mercy are key to God's character. God expects us, his people, to show love to their fellow man and to be loyal in their love towards him, just as he has been loyal. God asks that we don't just show mercy, but love to show it, that we give others the same mercy that we want to receive from him. We do this by acting out of a spirit of generosity and grace, rather than duty. We see this also reflected in Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." Perhaps mercy is a strange word for us. In this context, we might not think of it as it's explained. In the dictionary, it gives the meaning of mercy as compassion or forgiveness shown towards someone whom it is within one's power to punish or harm. But to God, it simply means responding out of love. When you see the physical, emotional and spiritual needs of those around you, we must act. When we see someone who's worn down by life, reach out by supporting them and encouraging them. When we see someone who's hungry, look for a way they can be fed. When we see someone who's lost, help them find a new path and walk along with them until they find their own way. When we feel that prompting of the Spirit to act, we mustn't hold back, but remember that we are called to love. And so we come to walk humbly with your God. Perhaps this should be first, as it is walking closely with God that enables us to do the other two. But it is the walking humbly that can be the challenge. Humility is not something that comes easily to us human beings. If you think you're humble, you've probably already failed. "I'm really good at humility" doesn't sound quite right, does it? Humility here comes from the heart. It's when we recognise that it is God who is leading us, not the other way around. It's when we act without even thinking about ourselves, but just caring for the other. When we don't even consider thinking about who knows what we've done or that we need to tell everyone, but to be content with the knowledge that God knows. These words of Micha are as relevant to us today as they were when he originally shared them. They act as a reminder to us that God requires justice, righteousness and compassion, because he himself is just, righteous and compassionate to us. Up to this point, I've spoken mainly about making this text a reality in our own lives. And you may be thinking, but this is for the whole church. Well, the reality is that we, as individuals, come together to be church. The people we are as individuals is reflected in our shared life together. Although this means that we are blessed with sharing many gifts between us, it also means that we share our struggles too. We are who we are, and we all bring our baggage with us, whether we like it or not. And whether we like it or not, it plays a part in the life of the church as we travel together through the many ups and downs of life. But if, as part of our commitment to be intentional disciples, we are able to put in place the things God requires of us, to seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with Him in our relationships with each other, then, in time, we will see change taking place. And those changes will be evident not just in the wider life of the church, but in the places where we find ourselves each day, in our homes, in our places of work, in our relationships with our family and friends. So, All Saints, what does the Lord require of us in 2021 and for the whole of our lives? In the Message Bible, it says simply this: He's already made it plain how to live, what to do. What God is looking for in men and women is quite simple. Do what is fair and just to your neighbour. Be compassionate and loyal in your love, and don't take yourself too seriously, but take God seriously. So are we willing to put our trust in God and give it a try? I'm up for the challenge. Are you?
You call me out upon the waters, the great unknown, where feet may fail. And there I find you in the mystery, in oceans deep, my faith will stand. My soul will rest in your embrace, for I am yours. You are mine. Your grace abounds in deepest waters. Your sovereign hand will be my guide. My soul will rest in your embrace.